Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the scariest thing you've ever seen? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My neighbor and her 10-year-old stepson were brutally murdered while I was at home next door with my newborn. I thought I heard something and checked my door was locked, then heard something a bit later but thought it was a dog barking. It was her being murdered. Police thought they tried my door first, but it was locked. It's still unsolved. Blake and China Dykes. To this day, I'm crazy about locking my door, even in a gated community. Our neighbors, 3 people, were murdered around 8:30 p.m. while we sat at the kitchen table playing cards. Although the window faced their house, we didn't notice the man get out of his car and randomly knock on their door. The events that unfolded in the weeks that followed were truly terrifying. A guy having a massive heart attack and dying beside me on the bus. I was only 15 and had to get up to tell the bus driver, "Excuse me, I think this guy just died." He didn't believe me at first. I think he was just in shock. He pulled over and yeah, the guy was dead. Oddly enough, I've seen some scary things, but the most scary was a rabid, probably no other explanation, raccoon. I was on a trip through the boonies in West Virginia and came around a corner. On the side of the road was a raccoon just standing there all matted up and filthy with dirty drool dripping from its mouth, and a little bastard locked eyes with me, and I could tell it would straight up murder me if it could. It wanted to murder me. Scary as hell. I actually reflexively locked my doors and hit the gas, glanced in the rear view, and it had turned, still standing, to keep glaring at me. It was like 20 freaking years ago, and I could still see it. This was miles from literally anywhere, and I didn't own a phone, so I didn't report it. It looked like it would be dead soon anyway. Probably should have, but I was young and stupid. I got a call about an elderly woman in an old folks' home in the not best part of town seeing things. We get there, and the scene just looks like something from a haunted mansion. This little old lady is sitting in an oversized sofa chair, gripping the armrest. At first, she doesn't say anything, but I prod her to talk to me and tell me what's wrong. "There's a shadow man in my room," she whispered. "He unlocked the door from the inside to get in. He's here to kill me. Please, I beg you, let him kill me." I'm a bit taken aback by the last bit, but tell her I could only help her get to a hospital. She nods her head, then slowly stands. Suddenly she tries to run, head first to literally dive into the fireplace. Thankfully, we were able to catch her mid-jump. The rest of the call was pretty calm after that. Watching my mom die from cancer for months. Then, when it got to the end, I was there in the hospital watching the change from someone being strong to very weak, unable to move, cold, and not making sense of words. The smell of the hospital lingered on my clothes for weeks. Then, at the funeral, my dad told me to give her a kiss goodbye on the cheek, and it scarred me for a long time on how she felt. Completely ice cold. Didn't feel real. I was 15 at the time, and I'll always remember that ice cold feeling on my lips, especially since I remember how warm she was when we held hands crossing the street. Bit of rambling words there. And coincidentally, her 16 years of passing will be on Thursday. Love you, Mama. Miss you. You were the spirit of every holiday and love in our home, and I haven't been able to fill that void since. 2 patients at my job are tied for the scariest. The first was a guy who'd shot himself in the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. He shredded off half his face, including his entire jaw, one eye, and part of his scalp, but he'd missed his brain entirely. This meant that he was fully awake and aware of his surroundings as he was brought into critical care. I was in charge of identifying him for the medical team, which meant closely examining his face, so there was no way for me to avoid looking at him. I distinctly remember making eye contact with him, remaining eye, and seeing what was left of his tongue moving in the back of his throat. I never was able to find out who he was, but I hope he found peace. The second was a schizophrenic man who, in the middle of a psychotic episode, chopped off his penis with a kitchen knife, then stuck the penis in the fridge on a paper plate. Voices told him to do it, and he obeyed. The problem was that he lived alone and nobody knew he'd done this, so it was a full 24 hours before he became lucid, realized what he'd done, and called 911. In an ER, you would get pretty well adjusted to seeing blood and gore, but dried blood is something entirely different. I'll never forget seeing him walk in through the ambulance bay with EMS calm as anything, absolutely covered in the dried blood. EMS had the penis in an emesis bag. The whole tableau was truly unsettling. Coming out of a casino in Lake Tahoe, a friend and I saw a brand new Cadillac in the parking lot with police cars surrounding it and floodlights lighting up the interior of the car. A lady was screaming hysterically, "No, no, no, don't." And as we kind of focused in on what was happening, we realized that there was a man in his 30s with a gun to his head. He was going to commit suicide, and he was screaming back at his wife that he'd lost everything. All their money, the house, their car. He was sorry and he had no choice. We tried to hurry past because this was awful, and we're just even with the car when she, I guess you would have to say, wailed, and then we heard the gunshot. I experienced the school shooting during my third year of college. It changed how I viewed the states and a lot of other things that take place there. Thankfully, only one 19-year-old boy was murdered and 4 others shot in cold blood. The whole thing was so surreal, and at times I find it hard to find words to describe the experience without going into almost minute-by-minute detail. Well, I don't have any crazy death stories, but I lived in an area where you might run into someone on drugs, something I've never seen before. Had a lady come into the place I work, and the way her head moved, it was like her head was too heavy for her neck, and she kept throwing it back to try and look up at me, and it would slump back to the side. Creeped me the F out. Apparently she was on heroin, from what I'm told. I've got so many, to be honest, but the one that stuck with me was when I was about 6. I have an older brother that has severe mental issues. When he gets angry, it takes over. I remember fragments of the night he was removed from my house. He choked my mom, he shoved my dad out the dining room window, and I ran upstairs with my sister until the police arrived. I went downstairs and sat on the stairs as my brother threw a chair at one of the cops and got tackled by the other. They wrestled on the ground, and then one of the officers pulled some sort of mace. It had zero effect on my brother, but full effect on me. Then I remember being outside near the police car with a bottle of water, and then sitting in my living room with the TV on a blue screen as the office asked me what happened. Honestly, the second scared I've ever been. That's no easy thing. When a family member, a sibling, has, that type of anger in them, it can be very difficult because I know there's a part where there's still that love and longing, but the actions don't seem like someone that could be under the same roof. Sorry. Odd one. A lifetime ago, I worked as a lighting tech for a high-rise building. But one day the local electricity utility came over and was visiting their room and roaming around the building before we did some tests that weekend, checking neutrals on each floor. These specific rooms are a room in most high-rises where the local utilities come into the building. While we had keys to that room, we didn't go in there, mainly because we didn't need to. Well, I got told to check that room to make sure all lighting worked in there. I had to replace a few lights while on a ladder under the building's main transformer, and the distribution area was for all the power going into the building. Because of how that room was laid out and the main transformer room directly above us, you could look directly up into the main transformer. It was very, very foreboding having all that electricity around you, along with being able to see the open 15 kV transformer switchgear directly above your head. I was 17, leaving our local Dairy Queen. I was waiting to pull out and saw Harley coming my way, and I was watching him, waiting for him to pass. Very clearly, I remember seeing his face and watching him clench the handlebars and lock up the tires on the brakes, and I wondered what he was doing. He was going pretty fast. It felt like slow motion watching him plow into the car driven by an old lady that didn't see him while turning in front of him, and watching him sail up over my car, cartwheeling until he landed. I jumped out and yelled to the cashier at the Dairy Queen, whom I knew to call 911, and ran over to him. He was missing a shoe, and I could see his shin bone sticking out of his leg. Oddly, not a ton of blood, but he was conscious and screaming. More bystanders came and helped while we waited in the ambulance. His bike was obliterated. Never heard if he survived or not, but his life was changed that day for sure. I've never forgotten it. I can picture the events clear in my mind 30 years later. Watched a buddy get caught out in the open by machine gun fire. Everyone got down and ran for the nearest cover, but he didn't have anything nearby to run to. So he just tried to make himself as flat to the ground as possible. We couldn't tell where the fire was coming from and had no way to get to him without coming from and getting shot ourselves. It felt like they were shooting at him for an eternity before he just stopped moving. I still use this example when teaching my soldiers about the importance of situational awareness on a micro and macro scale. When you patrol, every couple of steps, you should be asking yourself, if I get shot at right now, where can I seek cover? If the answer is, shit, there is no cover, change your route ASAP. Edit. We were eventually able to identify the enemy position and called for indirect fire, but by the time rounds splashed, they were long gone. European, especially German, appeasement politics toward Russia. Their inability and oftentimes even unwillingness to show unity and strength against this evil they are propagating. The fact that Russia can so easily undermine and manipulate our politicians and huge parts of our society. They aren't even trying that hard. It's so obvious that Russian leadership is in the wrong and actually evil, but so many people just don't want to see it and remain blind, stupid, and passive, or even in favor of Russia. This whole situation is way too close to 1939 and could actually lead into World War III. This is scary. My brother and I found a huge snake beside someone's house when we were probably 6 or 7 years old. In my memory, the snake is this large constrictor type snake. Obviously, someone's escaped pet, as we do not have them here. We were staring in shock at when the teenage son who lived in a house nearby saw us. He walks up, sees the snake, and says, "Oh, I got something for that." He leaves and comes back with a chainsaw and proceeds to cut it in half. My last memory of it is him walking away with 2 pieces. I have a large gap in my memory after that, but to my knowledge, we never told our parents about it. Doesn't seem as bad compared to some of these posts, but my dead best friend at her funeral in 8th grade. She was the first big death I'd experienced, and it was a sudden tragic event. We talked the morning of the accident, and that afternoon she was gone. They did an open casket funeral, still not sure why, honestly, and I was not prepared to see her like that. Due to the trauma of the accident, her face had been partially reconstructed and had completely broken her neck. She was obviously disfigured, and I could see the lines through the caked-on makeup. The artist did a fine job. Just details you notice after seeing them live. It made me freeze up, and I still debate about whether I should have walked up to her or not. It's been almost 10 years now. When I think about her, I see her living, but still see those horrible lines and her bent neck sometimes.